Right, so hello and welcome back to Books and Things. This is the second day of Brontë Week, and today I'm going to be talking about Anne Brontë's novel Agnes Grey. Chapter 1. The Parsonage. All true histories contain instruction, though in some the treasure may be hard to find, and when found so trivial in quantity that the dry, shrivelled kernel scarcely compensates for the trouble of cracking the nut. Whether this be the case with my history or not, I am hardly competent to judge. I sometimes think it might be useful to some, and entertaining to others, but the world may judge for itself. Shielded by my own obscurity and by the lapse of years and a few fictitious names, I do not fear to venture, and will candidly lay before the public what I would not disclose to the most intimate friend. Agnes Grey was Anne Brontë's first novel. Her second was The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, which I will speak about later in the week, but her first was Agnes Grey. Agnes Grey is quite a short novel, and it tells the story of a young woman called, unsurprisingly, Agnes Grey. Agnes Grey is the daughter of a clergyman, and after their family go through some financial troubles, she decides to go off and be a governess. It's not necessarily that fun for her. She gets put with a family who are quite cruel to her. The children are very, very disobedient and very unruly and nasty to her, and the parents are not very nice to her either and don't show her any respect, which means none of the children show her respect. Basically, the novel is about Agnes Grey's experiences as a governess, and a little later on, in true Brontë style, there is also a little bit of a love interest going on, but the bulk of the book is really concerned with what it was like to be a governess in the 19th century. There are many things I love about Agnes Grey. I think historically it is one of the most interesting novels of the 19th century because the governess as like a thing is such a massive concern within the Victorian period and within Victorian literature. The governesses occupied this really odd position where they were neither servants nor mistresses or masters, where they were commanding and were supposed to have the respect of children, but they did not have the respect of the children's parents. And these children who were being instructed by these governesses would grow up to be socially above these governesses. So they were the masters and the mistresses of the governesses, even though the governesses were expected to teach and kind of control them. It's quite a complicated social position because to be a governess you had to be educated, but to be a governess you also had to be below the social standing of the people you were working for, and it proved quite complicated within Victorian society as a kind of social position within a lot of houses. There weren't that many jobs that educated women could do in Victorian society. Governesses were often treated quite harshly, and I think Agnes Grey is a fascinating book in terms of exposing the complexities of the social position of the governess and often how harshly they were treated by their employers. Anne Brontë was a governess herself, and a lot of the experiences within Agnes Grey I think you can see as coming from her kind of personal experience. I also think the writing throughout is very, very good, as is the kind of characterization and like psychological depth to it. I think Agnes Grey as a character is very well explored. I'm not sure that many characters outside of Agnes herself are as well explored because it is so focused on her life as a governess. We kind of see her sister and her parents as sort of always to the sidelines, and we never really get to properly see what they're like. That kind of not irritates me, but I feel it's a bit of a shame. But Agnes Grey herself is so developed as a character, and her internal psychology, the way she thinks about things, and the kind of pain but determination that she has is so good, and that's something I find in a lot of the Bronte's fiction. Actually, I find this a lot in Charlotte Bronte's fiction as well, and also in Anne's other novel, The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. Like, there is such a strong portrait of these women who are suffering so much and in like horrible situations, but are very like determined and strong and just kind of carry on with stuff regardless. I like Agnes a lot as a character. I think she's very powerfully portrayed because she's young and she struggles and she's in pain, but she also deals with it in a really interesting way and is kind of determined to make something of herself. In general, the themes of religion and morality running throughout the book are really interesting as well, and they kind of explore a tension between Agnes Grey knowing that people look down on her, but also at times she kind of looks down on quite a lot of people. There are times where Agnes Grey, you can feel her judging other people because they are not as good as her, and even though at the same time they are judging her because she is not as like privileged as them, and that's a really interesting like theme running throughout the book that I think is very good. I also think just the writing is really good. I think Anne Brontë is so underrated in terms of the Brontë sisters. I will talk about The Tenant of Wildfell Hall later, which I think is a far greater novel than Agnes Grey, but I do think her writing in both is very, very strong, and she's a very like talented and interesting writer, and I think deserves as much acclaim as Charlotte Brontë and Emily Brontë because she is very good. The reason why Agnes Grey is not further up this list is probably just for me it's quite like a small story. I don't know, it's quite a less ambitious novel than The Tenant of Wildfell Hall, and it's also less ambitious than I would say most of Charlotte Bronte's novels and also than Wuthering Heights, Emily Bronte's novels. Although Agnes Grey is very powerful and very realistic, it doesn't feel as kind of it's not as big as other Brontë novels, and for me, I like it a lot, but I can't love it. I can't like devour it as much as the other Brontë novels, because it doesn't have that passion in the same way. It's more kind of calm and collected, I would say, than some of the other Brontë novels, and certainly than The Tenant of Wildfire Hall. It's a very honest and realistic novel, and although I think it does explore a lot of really interesting themes, especially about like the social position of governesses in the 19th century, I don't think it has as much to offer as some of the other Brontë novels. Although I find it really interesting and really enjoyable, I don't find it quite as like powerful and mind-blowingly brilliant as The Tenant of Wildfire Hall and as many other Brontë novels that I will go on to mention later in the week. So I'm very fond of Agnes Grey. I think it's a really interesting book, and maybe quite a nice place to start with the Brontes, because it's kind of a bit calmer and will ease you into the Brontes. Not that they really need easing into, because they're so good and so like gripping and accessible, and I really think like the Brontes are the best place to start with Victorian literature. I really do. Not Emily, actually, not Emily. Don't start Victorian literature with Wuthering Heights, because it's very divisive. But like, I think Charlotte Brontë and Anne Brontë are great places to start with Victorian literature, and their writing is like very good and really easy to get into. And Agnes Grey, I think, is a great place to start because of that. The reason why it's not my favourite is not because I think there's anything wrong with it, or there's anything imperfect or anything I don't like about it. It's just that it's not as utterly fantastic as other Brontë novels. But anyway, I will talk about the rest of those utterly fantastic Brontë novels later on in the week. I will see you tomorrow when I will be talking about another Brontë novel. In the meantime, happy reading and happy Brontë reading. Shockingly, I do not have a physical copy of Agnes Grey. This appalls me. I'm therefore reading from my Kindle, and I need to buy a copy of Agnes Grey, clearly.